We're up to Daf Chav Zayin, and we're discussing this very gory case of somebody who throws a baby off the roof. Uba shar v'kiblo b'karnov. And before the baby actually hits the ground and perishes, the shar destroys the animal, the baby, kills the baby. And the nidon here is whether or not the owner of the shar has to pay kofer because of the shar killing a human being. And the Gemara says, Beplukta, this depends upon the machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel ben Noshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and the Rabbanan, Desanya. We learned a brisa that records the following controversy regarding the pasuk in Shmos Chaf Aleph, Im kofer yushas olav v'nosan pidyon nafsho. What does it mean, kofer pidyon nafsho? Who's nefesh? It's one of those ambiguous pronouns. And the Rabbanon have one opinion, and that's called Tmei Nizak, which means that you're paying for Kaviyachol, the life of the victim who perished. And Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka disagrees with Omer, Tmei Mazik. You're really being poda your own nefesh, meaning the nefesh of the Mazik, the bailam of the shor. Now, in the case of the Tinok that was thrust over the roof, then at the moment that the shor killed the baby had no monetary value. And therefore, if you hold Tmei Nizak, which is the Shita of the Rabbanon, then there won't be any kofer here, because kofer is to pay Tmei Nizak. There is no Tmei Nizak here, because at the moment that the baby is on its way down, it has no value. But if you hold like Rabbi Shmuel, then Tmei Mazik means that the Bailim have to pay a kofer for themselves. Omar Rabba, Nofal Mirosh Hagat. There was a normal velocity wind, a Ruach Mitsuya, that pushed the person over the edge or the ledge of a roof. And Rabbeinu Chananel adds over here that we're talking about a case where he was sleeping on top of a roof, and during his sleep, he had some sort of a dream, that caused him to be, shall we say, sexually aroused. And now, nitka be'isha, he actually falls off the roof, and he has intercourse with a woman. Again, it's hard to imagine this could happen, but now the question is, chayav bi'arba dvarim. The Gemara is going to soon delineate those 4 dvarim that you have to pay, and this is called a hezek biyadiyah. And why is this a hezek biyadiyah? Because ein kishu shalomi das, so he had das. However, biyavimto lo kana, this biyah without kavanas biyah cannot serve as a kinyan for yibum, for yivama, and therefore she would still be zkuka yibum, and she would need chalitza to marry anyone else. And why is this biyah not effective for kinyan, to effectuate a kinyan, even though bias yavam is kona afilu b'shogi? But here he didn't have kavanas biyah. He didn't have kavanah for the ma'aseh, he just fell on her. And the Gemara says that based on V'yavama Yavo Leh, the pasuk indicates Yavo Leh b'yediyah u'bekavana l'shem biyah. He has to have kavanas biyah. He doesn't have to have kavanas yibum, but he certainly has to have kavanas biyah, which he didn't have, and therefore he's not kona the Yavama. Now, we go back to the original statement here of Rabbah that he's chayav b'arba dvarim. What are these arba dvarim? Chayav b'nezek tsar ripui v'sheves. Now, she apparently, as a victim, suffered damages, but there are only 4, and that's to the exclusion of al boshes lo. Why not boshes lo? Tisna, we learned in the Mishnah later on Daf Pei Vav Amud Beis, she'eino chayv al boshes ad she'en miskavin levayish, that boshes requires kavod levayish. He didn't have any kavod levayish, and therefore he's not chayv boshes, but he is chayav as chovil b'chavero. And the premise is that Adam Mu'ad Liolam, and therefore he has to pay our Bar Tashlumin of Nezek Tsar Ripui and Sheves. V'Amar Rabba, another statement of Rabba with regard to someone who fell off a roof. Nafal mirosh hagag baruch she'eino mitzuya. Now he's an anus. He never expected this high velocity wind. Vehizik u'biesh chayav al nezek u'pata b'arba dvarim. He does not have to pay tsar, ripui, sheves, and boshes. Now we understand why he's not chayav for boshes, because as we said before, you need achis kavin levayesh. But why is he potter from tsar, ripui, and sheves? And the answer is that those chiyuvim depend upon mezid or karav lemezid. Here he was an honest because he fell off the roof, but ruach sheina mitzuya, unusual high velocity wind, not anticipated. But baruch mitzuya vehizik ubiesh chaya bared bodvam partor alaboshes. In the case of a ruach mitzuya, then although he's parted from boshes because he didn't have kavanah levayesh, but nevertheless adamud liolam, and he's chayav for nezek tsar ripui v'sheves. V'imnis hapech. What if he does a twirl in the air as he's coming down from the roof with a ruach sheina mitzuya? Then chayav afal boshes. Apparently, this is kavana for the maisa of hezek. Although I wouldn't say he had kavana levayesh, but nevertheless he had enough kavana to be mechayev for boshes because he was miskavin lahazik. And Desanya, we learned in a brisa with regard to the chiv boshes in Parshas Ki Teitze. It says that ki notzu anoshim yachtov ish v'yachiv v'karva eshes hachad lahatzil isha miyad b'akeu v'sholcha yoda v'chzika b'muvushav v'katzosas kappa. And the brisa explains v'mashin ama v'sholcha yoda Eini yodeh shechzika. Don't I know that for sure she sholcha yoda means she held on to him? Matam lomar v'chzika. So why did the Torah have to add v'chzika? Lomar lecha. This is a ribui to be marba chiv tashlume boshes. Kevan shen is kavin lahazik. Afal pichlon is kavin levayish. So if he had kavanas hezek, and we're assuming again in the case where in this apech he had kavanas hezek, therefore he pays for boshes, even in the absence of kavana levayish. The Omar Rabba, more from Rabba on these dinim of chiluke tashlum and iniach lo gachel salibo meis potu. This very shocking halacha. A man puts a burning coal on someone's chest and the person dies. The meniach is not considered a rotzeach. And why not? So this is based on a principle called Yachol Salik, that the victim, who's now no longer alive, but he could have taken the gachelis off of his heart. And therefore he, in a sense, is somewhat guilty for what happened. But if the Meiniach put down the gachelis al bigdo v'nisraf, chayev. Now, why couldn't we apply the same logic of Yachol Hoyel Salik, that he could have removed the Gachela? So why do you pay compensation for the beged? And here the Gemara operates with a very, very unique principle. And that is that sometimes when Ruvain sets up a hezek and it's about to take place, Shimon is about to be damaged, Shimon has the right to make a decision, you know what, I'm going to leave things be. I'm not going to interfere, and I'll be tovea this mazik to bezdin. So there was no mechila here that we could derive by virtue of the fact that he wasn't misalik es abeged, es agachels min abeged. Omar Rava travayu taninu. I'm going to derive both of these dinim of Rava from Mishnayos. The first din of Meniach Achels al libo shel chaver nechayv al misoso because hoyelo l'salik es agachels. This nan based on a Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin on Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis, and the Mishnah says Kavash Olav l'socha ur or l'socha mayim v'eino yochel lalos mishal meis chaya. If a person pushes someone into fire or under the water, in a way that the victim had no possibility of saving himself. The force and the power of the Rotzech was so stark that he had to die as chayiv, therefore the Rotzech is chayiv. However, if, let's say, the attacker did not push him into the fire in a mayim, but dachaf olitocha or olitocha mayim, and in such a case where he pushed him, he didn't force him down, he only pushed him, is yochel lalos misham, the nidchaf, we'll call him, could have found a way of getting up to rise above the eish of the mayim. Is umes, he didn't do so, and therefore pot to the dochef is pot. However, what about a person who's mazik bigdo shel chavero? In such a case, even though the victim could have removed the gacheles from the beged, he has the right, as we said earlier, to decide, you know what, I'll be tovem to bezdin. This now we learned in the Mishnah later on Daf Sari Beis. If a man says to his friend, Kra es ksusi, or Shvar es kadi, chayav. Now, if Shimon says to Ruvain, rip my garment or break my vessel, then it would seem that he is being mochem. But no, we have a principle here that underlies this mission, that a person is not mochel, he's just waiting to take the guy to Bezdin and force him to pay him compensation. But Almanas Liftar, if the owner of the beged or the kli says to the mazik, you know what, you'll be potter from tashlumin, potter, that's considered a mechil. Boy, Rabba, how do we view the evid? Shall we say kigufo domi, and therefore just like a goof of a regular person, like the Adon, for example, would have to be mesalik the gacheles, so therefore also the Evid should have been mesalik the gacheles, and if he leaves the gacheles and he dies, then the meiniach is potter, and he doesn't have to pay shloshim shel Evid. Or should we say alternatively, kimamono domi? We view the Eved as shall we say a chefta shel mamon, and with regard to a chefta shel mamon, we don't say haylo l'salim. So again, even though technically, in reality, the Eved could have been Mesalik the Gacheles, nevertheless, the Adon doesn't have to take a loss over here because the Eved, is a Chefta Shel Mom. Now, in the note here, he quotes the Nachlas Moshe, one of the great Achronim of Bava Kamma, who I think was, if I remember correctly, was the Talmud of the Gaon. He says the following: what was the suffix of Rabbah? Do we say that the reason why Meniach Achel Salev Adam Potter is because the Meniach Tain is that Vadai Shal Adam Shal Veniach Achel Yisalik also? In other words, the Meniach certainly he relied on the fact that the victim would remove the gacheles, and therefore if the person was not mesalik the gacheles, then we don't hold the meiniach responsible. And that should apply as a p'tur even in the case of an eved. Oh, shatamu, the reason why the meiniach is potter in the regular case is mishum da nizak posha bi'atzma. The nizak is considered a poshea. He's responsible for his own death, and therefore the maniach is potter. But in the case of maniach ala eved, hadon eino mafsid b'mesha eved posha bi'atzma. Just give me a minute here. Again, if you say it's because he was an honest, he anticipated the guy would be Masalik, then the same thing should apply to the case of an Eved. right? That the Eved should have been Mesa the Gacheles. But if we say that the Nizak is Posher Atzmo, so that's in Kol Adam, not in an Eved. Why? Because in the case of Iniach al Eved, Ha'odon Eino Mafsid, Mesha Eved Posha Biatzmo. Just give me 1 second. If I don't have it, we'll just go on. Ha'odon Eino Mafsid, Mesha Eved Posha Biatzmo. I'm not sure how to interpret his words, but I think the general concept of the Nachas Moshe here. Oh, by the way, I said the Nachas Moshe was a Talmud of the Gaon. I think I made a mistake. This is a later Achron, like from the beginning of the 20th century. Anyway, I think what he's trying to say is that the Adon has no right to Tainus Ptur based on the Pshia of the Eved. And therefore, the Adon is Chayav. Anyway, let's go on. Imtim Salomar ki gufo domi. And therefore, the Meniach Achelas al libo shel Eved is Potur. I still have another suffix. Shoro mahu. What happens if a person puts a Gacheles on the shore of his friend and the shore dies? Should we say that just like in the case of a Meniach al Adam, we say that he's put because Hayilol is Salik, and therefore the Shar also should have been Misalik the Gacheles. Hodor Pashta Avdo Kigufo, but Shar Kimamon. So the final conclusion of Rabbah was that in the case of an Eved, we say Tegufo Hayochel Salik as Hagacheles, and therefore you're potter. But in the case of Shoro, you have to pay for the Nezikin of the loss of the Shor because the Shor does not have Das to be Masalik the Gacheles. And this leads us to the third parak Haminiach. Haminiach is Hakad B'Sharamu Ba Acher V'Niskal Ba U'Shvara Potter. So you had no right to put your card in the middle of Rishus Harabim. If somebody goes by and breaks it, he doesn't have to pay for that. And what happens if somebody goes by and gets damaged? Vim huzak ba, he trips and falls, or whatever happens. Is balachov is chayav b'niska, and this becomes bar. And putting a takol in Rishus Harabim is considered like digging a bar, and therefore you have to pay tashlume nezah. The Gemara says, "Pasap akad v'sim b'chavis." Very strange. The Reisha says, "Heminiachas akad," and the Sefer says, "Balachavis chayiv." It should have been balakad chayiv, or it should have said Heminiachas achavis. And the Gemara answers that this is a typical style of the Mishnayos. Tanan Nami. We have a Mishnah later on in Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. Zeh Bava Chaviso. So the Mishnah begins with Chavis. We'll soon see that it ends with Kad. But one person in Rishus Harabim is carrying a barrel. The other person is carrying a beam. And they banged into each other. As a result of this collision, the Kad broke. Now, what do you mean Kad? We just finished saying Zeba b'chavisa. So once again, Potur and Pasa b'chavis v'siyim b'chad. So the Baal HaKorah has a right to say, I was walking in Rishus Harabim, I was carrying a Korah, I'm allowed to do so, no one prohibits me, and if your Kad goes into my Korah, that's your problem, your headache. But again, Pasa b'chavis v'siyim b'chad. Tanan Nami, another Mishnah. Later on in Daf Kuf Tez Vav, it says, Zeba b'chaviso shel yayin v'zeba b'chadil shel dvash. So two people are going on the road. One is carrying a barrel of yayin. The other is carrying a kad of dvash. And nistika chavis shel dvash. All of a sudden, the dvash is in a chavis. It was in a kad, not a chavis. Dvash omed li shafech. So the dvash, which is more expensive than the yayin, is about to be lost, meaning spilled on the ground. And therefore, shafech zeh, this Good Samaritan, decides that he's going to pour out his wine and empty the chavis, in order to save the dvash. And you might say that now he has a right to sue the Baal Hadvash to pay him to replace the chavis shel yayin. No, ein lo el schara. The Baal Yayin is allowed to say, you know what? I'm going to pay you. I'm sorry, the Baal Dvash cannot demand payment for the yayin that the Baal Yayin lost. He can only say, you know what, I'll pay you wages. In any event, again, it's possible. The Mishnah will deliberately use both of these two words interchangeably, which they're both synonymous. And you can have a large kad that's called a barrel, and yet it's called a kad. You could have a small chavis, and we might call it a chavis, even though it's really a kad. Why does the Mishnah go out of its way to use both these terms interchangeably in the same Mishnah over and over and over again? And the answer is memkar. Let's say a person orders a chavis, and what gets delivered? What gets delivered is a kad. And now he wants to come and say, look, I ordered a chavis. You delivered a kad. My kavanah was only to buy a chavis. So, what exactly is going on over here? If they refer to in that location, they refer to a chavis when it's a large barrel, and a kad when it's a small kad. So then, halo karilin. Then surely the Mishnah is not going to tell me that if he delivers a kad when the buyer ordered a chavis, that's a valid kinyan. That's certainly a mekatos. Lo tzricha, but rather deruba karile lekada kado lechavita chavita. That although most of the people and the population of that city will call a kad, and a chavis, a kad being a smaller vessel, and a chavis being a larger vessel. Economy, there are those in the silent minority that kara lechavita kado lekada chavita. They use these terms interchangeably. If not for the Mishnah using these two terms, kad and chavis interchangeably, I would have thought that let's be kover based on rov. And rov have a distinction between kad and chavis, and therefore the buyer has a right to say, you delivered me a kad when I ordered a chavis. That was the havamina. We should go basaro. Mashmalon, here we turn to Chav Zayin Ovid Beis, the Ein Holchem B'Mav and Achara Ro.